you to know how good it is to have somebody here with me. Usually it's me and Chad and Shay, and we have a phone sitting right over here and records me. So that's what I talk into, so it's nice to see people, finally. We're going to begin. We're going to have a word of prayer, then I'm going to turn it over to Miss Carolyn and Miss Ruth. So let's go to the word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we do thank you for a wonderful day you blessed us with. We do thank you, Lord, that we have the opportunity to gather together as the body of Christ this evening. I pray, Father, that you would just be here with us in our service. I pray, Lord, that you would just speak to us through the worship and the word. It's all these things I pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Well, you put a phone up far if that makes it more comfortable.
No.
Good evening. We're going to sing out of the Red Book tonight, page 97. I'm standing on solid rock.
Discontentment, I cast my every care on the Lord.
turn to the book of Daniel. Daniel chapter 1. I'm going to spend the next few weeks on Wednesday nights in the book of Daniel because I want to show you something. I want to show you two things. I want to show you the life of a man named Daniel and how he was uncompromised in his faith. He did not compromise his faith, although he found himself in captivity at a place called Babylon. But because of his faithfulness to the Lord, he had a major impact on the king of Babylon, who was known to be a tyrant. He was a man who was prideful, a man who only thought about himself, a man who he thought people should worship. And his name was King Nebuchadnezzar. And so those are two things I want to show you over the next few weeks, the life of Daniel and how he had a major impact on the life of a king many would call a tyrant. Daniel chapter 1. Daniel chapter 1, we'll begin in verse 1. It says, "In the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, with some of the articles of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar, to the house of his God. And he brought the articles into the treasure house of his God." Now, the background to where Daniel begins is 2 Kings chapter 24. King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon invaded Jerusalem and invaded Judah a total of 3 times. The first time he came to invade was in 605 BC. He came again in 597, and then the last time he came in 586 BC, he destroyed Jerusalem completely. Now, each time King Nebuchadnezzar came from Babylon with his armies, they always took captives back with them to Babylon. So they went to Babylon at three different times, the people did. And the first time that he came in 605, he took some captives away. One man who went captive, or who was taken captive, was Daniel. And so that's kind of the setting here. King Nebuchadnezzar has come in when King Jehoiakim of Judah is reigning. He has taken many captive and even brought them back to Babylon. And it said that he also took from the temple that was in Jerusalem, took of several of their treasures and brought them back to place before his God. Now, who was King Nebuchadnezzar's God? Well, he goes by several names. Some people call him Bel, B-E-L. Some people call him Merodach. Some call him Marduk. But these are different names for his God that he worshipped. Now, verse 3. It says, "Then the king instructed Ashpenaz, the master of his eunuchs, to bring some of the children of Israel and some of the king's descendants and some of the nobles, young men, in whom there was no blemish, but good-looking, gifted in all wisdom, possessing knowledge and quick to understand, who had ability to serve in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the language and literature of the Chaldeans." You see, Babylon was smart. The king of Babylon was smart. He was importing a people who did not look like Babylonians, they didn't speak like Babylonians, and they didn't live like Babylonians. So in order to assimilate the Jewish people to Babylon culture, he selected descendants of kings. He selected noblemen of the Jewish people. He would bring them in. He would teach them their ways. He would teach them the Babylonian language. He would teach them the wisdom literature in their land. That way, they could help assimilate the people, make the people more like Babylonians than Jews. And it was a good idea, a good strategy that he had in mind. That way, if the people of Jerusalem, of Judah, the Jews came in and they were taught to behave like Babylonians, they would be less conflict. Everybody would get along. You could easily control the people better if they speak your language and walk and talk like you do. Does that make sense? And so that's exactly what is going on here. Now look at verse 5. It says, "And the king appointed for them a daily provision and 3 years of training for them, so that at the end of that time they might serve before the king. So, this would be a 3-year process. The young men would be chosen. They would spend 3 years learning the teachings, the language of the Babylonians. And as a reward, so to speak, the king, they would eat the same food that the king did, and they would drink the same drink that the king did. And that sounds wonderful. Sounds wonderful. Have the best of the best to eat and to drink. But not for Daniel. As it goes on here in verse 6, it says, Now from among those of the sons of Judah were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Now Daniel I recognize, but who are these other 3 men? We usually don't know them by these names, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. But this would be Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Okay. Now, I'm from Arkansas, so I say Abednego. I put that Arkansas slang there, but that's not really what it is. Let's look at verse 7. It says, To them the chief of the eunuchs gave names. He gave Daniel the name of Belshazzar, to Hananiah Shadrach, to Mishael Meshach, and to Azariah Abednego. Now, I say Abednego. I think that sounds better. But Abednego is his name. So why change their names? Well, they're going to teach them their language. They're going to teach them their customs. And they're going to give them Babylonian names to help them be more like Babylonians. Quit being so much of Jews and be more like us. And so they changed their name in order to do this. Now, what did their names mean? Well, Daniel means God is my judge. That is what his name means. But his name was changed to Belshazzar. And it means Baal, who is a god. Baal, protect the king. That's what his name means now. Hananiah means the Lord is gracious. And his name was changed to Shadrach. And it means command of Aku. Aku, A-K-U, was another Babylonian god. Mishael, who is like the Lord, is what his name means, but he was given the name Meshach. And his name means, in Babylon, who is what Aku is. And finally, Azariah, his name means in Hebrew, the Lord is my helper. But he received the name, the Babylonian name, Abednego, which means servant of Nego, or servant of Nebo, which is the god of vegetation. If you wanted your crops to grow in Babylon, you would pray to the god Nebo. So they gave them Babylonian names. Now they had no problem. Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had no problems having their names changed, and they had no problems learning the language, and they had no problems learning the customs. But they did have one problem, and that's presented in verse 8. Daniel had one problem. It says, But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's delicacies, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the chief of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. Daniel had no problem changing his name or learning the language or the customs of the people. He had a big problem in eating what they ate, in drinking what they drank. Why? Several reasons. Number one, according to Leviticus chapter 11, Daniel is Jewish, and therefore he follows the dietary laws listed in Leviticus chapter 11. He could only eat certain meats from certain animals. He could only eat certain kinds of seafood, certain kinds of fish. He could only eat certain kinds of birds, according to the law. And so there would be a problem. He couldn't eat everything the Babylonians ate because it would cause him to violate what God commanded. Now, these dietary laws in Leviticus chapter 11 has nothing to do to keep one healthy, but it has everything to do because the people of Israel were to be set apart. They were not to be like the nations. They were to be a kingdom, a nation of priests unto God. And so this laws of these dietary laws were for separation, to be holy as God is holy. And so Daniel was willing to not compromise his faith. He did not compromise his faith. And I think that means so much for me today. As I look back at my life, now I'm only going to be 32, so I'm not that old. But I look back at my life and I see areas in my life where I did compromise my faith. I gave in here in order to gain something there. I gave up this, and it's not really a big thing, but I compromised in one area to gain something in another area, and I believe many Christians do that today. We compromise in certain areas, and it's always to gain. It's always to gain. We don't mind compromising and saying something negative about our co-worker if that means it gets us a promotion at our job. That's a compromise. We don't mind compromising with our girlfriends or boyfriends if that means we gain something in return. Compromise. Many areas of life where we tend to compromise our faith, areas in our faith in order to gain something, but that should never be. Daniel was unwilling to compromise what he believed. Now, as I was looking at verse 8, I got to noticing something. I could understand the food based on Leviticus chapter 11. He couldn't eat the same food the Babylonians ate. It went against God's law. But what about the drink? What about the drink? Daniel had an uncommon standard. Wine, he drank wine as a Jew. He drank wine as a Jew. In fact, wine had many uses in the Old Testament. Number one, it states in Genesis 27:28 that wine is a gift of God. Wine was part of the sacrificial offerings in Exodus 29, verse 40. Wine is used as medicine in 2 Samuel chapter 16, verse 2. So wine was readily available and people used it even in Israel. So why did Daniel not drink the wine? Because wine can also be a real problem. It was a real problem to Noah in Genesis chapter 9. It was a real problem for a man named Lot, the nephew of Abraham, in Genesis chapter 19. It became a problem for kings and rulers in 1 Kings 16 and 1 Kings chapter 20. So wine, we find out, can be a real problem if it is abused. And there's the problem. Wine is abuse. Wine is not necessarily an evil thing in and of itself. It's what we do with it, is it not? We abuse all the good gifts of God and turn them into something they were never meant to be. And so drunkenness became a problem, especially for leaders. Especially for leaders. That's why God in Deuteronomy chapter 17 said that kings should not take much wine. Because why? It clouds the judgment. It clouds the judgment. And so Daniel, although wine would be acceptable for him to drink, he chooses not to keep his mind clear. So he had an uncommon standard. He did not compromise in his faith, and he held kind of an uncommon standard. Also, he would not eat of the food or drink of the wine for a third reason. The third reason being this, that before they ate or drank anything, what did they do first with it? The nations. They did. They took their food and they took their drink, and before they ate or drank, they offered it to their gods, to their idols. And then they would eat of it. And so when you ate the food or you drank the drink, you were actually worshiping, in a sense, that God, that deity. And so Daniel did not want to have any part of that. And notice what happens in verse 9. Notice what happens in verse 9. It says, "Now God had brought Daniel into the favor and goodwill of the chief of the eunuchs. And the chief of the eunuchs said to Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who has appointed your food and drink, for why should he see your faces looking worse than the young men who are your age? Then you would endanger my head before the king." Now, verse 9 strikes me. Now God had brought Daniel into the favor and goodwill of the chief of the eunuchs. The reason that we are willing to compromise in areas of our faith is because we are scared of the repercussions of what might happen to us. People may leave us. Friends may no longer be friends. Neighbors may no longer be neighbors. Co-workers may no longer like us. And so in order to calm the fear, we compromise. Even though we shouldn't. But here, Daniel was unwilling. He did not compromise, and yet he gained favor with the chief of the eunuchs. Look at Proverbs 16, if you would. This is something to keep in mind. Proverbs 16, verse 7. Proverbs 16, verse 7 says this: "When a man's ways please the Lord, he makes even his enemies to be at peace with him." And so because Daniel did not compromise his faith, because he stood firm on what God's will was for his life, because he obeyed God's commandments, because he was obedient to God, God gave him favor even amongst enemies. And God can do the same for us. He is the one who controls the hearts of men. And so therefore we should not fear. Also, to remember the words of Jesus in the New Testament when he said, "What does it profit a man if he gain the whole world and loses his soul?" Verse 10. "And the chief of the eunuchs said to Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who has appointed your food and drink, for why should he see your faces looking worse than the young men who are your age? Then would endanger my head before the king." Listen, this chief of the eunuchs said, Ashpenaz, he says, "Why would I endanger my own life? If you don't eat and you don't drink and you start looking sickly, guess whose head's on the chopping block? It's not yours. It's mine." And so Daniel responds this way in verse 12. Skip to verse 12. He says, "Please test your servant for 10 days, and let them give us vegetables to eat and water to drink." Don't worry about it. He shows great faith here and says, just test us. Put us to the test. Put it to the test. Give us nothing but vegetables and waters to drink, and after 10 days, you can judge whether we're going to be looking worse or better. I like this first thing. Daniel says, please. Please. He's polite, is he not? Please. As Christians, although we should never compromise our faith in order to gain something, that we should stand firm in what we believe and why we believe it, at the same time, we must do this without arrogance, without boastfulness, without I'm better than you are mentality. Daniel never does that. He never boasts about his faith. He never is arrogant in his faith. Instead, he stands firm in his faith, and he is gracious towards others, compassionate towards others, kind towards others. And so I like this word, please. Please, he says. Now, many people, I don't know if you remember this or not, but you remember a few years ago they came out with a diet called the Daniel Plan? It was a doctor who came out with a diet called the Daniel Plan. Now, I'm not saying the Daniel Plan doesn't work, but this verse was never meant to be used as a diet formula. Okay? Vegetables and water, I'm sure, is tremendously healthy for you, and you can lose weight and feel good doing it. But that's not what this is promoting. Instead, what this shows us, it's an act of faith on Daniel's part, that the Lord would sustain him and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Not only sustain them, but they would be better in appearance than the people who were there with them. So it's a faith issue here. It's not a diet issue. Look at verse 13. After you give us vegetables and waters to drink, it says, then let our appearance be examined before you, and the appearance of the young men who eat the portion of the king's delicacies, and as you see fit, so deal with your servants. So he consented with them in this matter and tested them 10 days. And at the end of the 10 days, their features appeared better and fatter. Now, they didn't get fat eating vegetables and drinking water. This means they were healthier. Okay? And they got better and fatter in flesh than all the young men who ate the portion of the king's delicacies. Thus the steward stood away their portion of delicacies and wine that they were to drink and gave them vegetables. As for these 4 men, God gave them wisdom and knowledge and the skill in all literature and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. God's hand is seen throughout this entire book of Daniel. It is seen very profound in Daniel chapter 1. It wasn't the Babylonians who gave these young men knowledge and wisdom. It wasn't because all of their learning, through all their studies they had done, it was God who gave them wisdom. And I think that's very important to point out. Now, verse 18. It says, now at the end of the days, when the king had said that they should be brought in, the chief of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. Then the king interviewed them, and among them all none was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore they served before the king, and in all matters of wisdom and understanding about which the king examined them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians, all the astrologers who were in all his realm. Thus Daniel continued until the first year of King Cyrus. Daniel had a long-standing position within the Babylonian kingdom. When the king of Babylon fell and the Persian kingdom came in, Daniel was very instrumental in advocating for the king of Persia, King Cyrus, to let the people return to Israel. They were in captivity for 70 years, but Daniel had the ear of the king. So the uncompromised life. That's what we could title chapter 1 of Daniel. The uncompromised life. What areas in your life are you willing to compromise on? That's the question. That's the question. I have compromised a lot in my life. I have not stood firm in my faith where I should stand firm on it. And when I did so in arrogance, and I did so in a hateful way. Something to be learned from Daniel is that one doesn't have to compromise in order to gain. God is the one who gives us favor among men. God is the one who produces this in our life. And He alone is enough. We should never have to compromise in order to gain. For if we have Him and we know Him, then we have all that He has. That's what the New Testament says. If you are a believer in Jesus Christ, then you are heir of all things. God has not withheld anything back from you. Therefore, do not compromise in your faith, because you've already inherited all things. Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we do thank you for your word and the truth that it holds for our lives. We thank you for the life of Daniel and his friends, for the example they set for us. The uncompromised life. That sounds a lot easier than it is. There are pressures in life where we're presented with situations that would have us compromise, go against what you would have in store for our lives. And the temptation is, oh, it's not a big thing. It's little. Just give up this one thing in order to gain something else. When those temptations come, I pray, Lord, you give us the strength to stand firm in our faith and present it to people in such a way that is gracious and loving, but we never stray from your truth. For all these things I pray in Jesus' name.